Good afternoon, everyone. If you can kindly find a seat, we want to start the program. A few weeks ago, I was walking with my 7-year-old son on the street where I live. A car passing by rolled down their window and shouted, "Free Palestine!" Now, I know some will say this is not anti-Semitism. However, why did he choose to yell at me? Did I wear an Israeli flag? So, the New Jersey Jewish Business Alliance, and I guess we'll hear more from the experts on that. The New Jersey Jewish Business Alliance mission is to make New Jersey a better place and a more comfortable and peaceful place for the Jewish professional to live, work, and visit. That's why we felt it's important to have this conversation to see how we, as a community, the business community, can help combat hate and anti-Semitism. I want to welcome the elected officials in the room, former governor and future mayor, Jim McGreevey. I think I saw Englewood Mayor Michael Wiles here. And of course our host city council president, Jersey City Council President Joyce Waterman. Fair Lawn Councilwoman Gail Rottenstrick. And I believe we have a representative of Congressman Tom Kaine's office, Aaron Dariff. I really want to thank Rabbi Cooper, who made the trip to be with us today. It means a lot for us and for the entire region to have him here and have this important conversation. I want to thank our host, the Cabrini Institute for Government and Leadership, the St. Peter's School of Business, and their Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and our silver sponsors, Fair New Jersey and Jason Tillis. This event wouldn't have happened if not for Dal Rand. Her vision and wisdom, I mean, she's been like a mentor to me the last couple of months, every step of the way. Now, you know, most people in that age take a step back, relaxing a little bit. Not Daryl. He's all in it. And I thank you immensely for that. And of course, the two sons, Jason and David, at the Harrison Rand advertising firm, who've been with us every step of the way. This has been an incredible partnership, so thank you. With that, I'll call upon David Rand to tell us a little bit about their family history and why this is so important to them. David?
David, thank you for the introduction. As a member of the fifth generation of our family who settled in Jersey City in 1884, we are proud to continue our roots in Hudson County and help to bring this event to fruition. This community and this university hold a special place for our family, as Father Vic Yanatelli, the longtime president and chancellor of St. Peter's, was not only a dear family friend, but he was actually also part of my bar mitzvah service many years ago. Additionally, several of my uncles received their educations here as well. Our communities have a long and integrated history. In conversation with Rabbi Cooper today is Mayor Michael Wilds of Englewood. Michael Wilds was elected in November 2018 and is the managing partner with the leading immigration law firm of Wilds and Weinberg, which was founded in 1960 by his father, Leon Wilds. His best-known accomplishment was his successful representation of John Lennon in his widely publicized deportation proceedings. Mayor Wilds serves as counsel to several international law firms and Lincoln Center. He's an adjunct professor at the Benjamin Cardozo School of Law in New York and teaches 2 classes, one of which he inaugurated, on business immigration law. He is a former federal prosecutor with the United States Attorney's Office in Brooklyn and author of Safe Haven in America, Battles to Open the Golden Door. Having represented the United States government in immigration proceedings, Michael is a frequent participant on professional panels and commentator on network television and radio with regard to immigration law. He has testified on Capitol Hill in connection with anti-terrorism legislation and is internationally renowned for his successful representation of distinguished individuals and corporate clients. Today, he is representing pro bono the widow of the Jersey City shooting victim. And now Governor McGreevey will introduce Rabbi Cooper.
Thank you. It's a great honor, and particularly to the Rand family and to our Council President Joyce Waterman and to Michael, to elected officials, many friends, family. For me, it's a great honor to be here back at St. Peter's, but it harkens back. I was the sponsor of the legislation requiring the teaching of the Shoah in the New Jersey public school system. And I'm proud to say that New Jersey's been first in some dubious activities, but this was a great honor. The point of the story was I had a fellow from Brooklyn, what we in New Jersey refer to as the New Jerusalem. That's a joke. And his name was Herb Gilsenberg of blessed memory. So Joe Doria, who taught at St. Peter's, Herb sent a letter out to every state legislator. And he said, this is a critically important bill. You should pass this bill. We need you to pass this bill. Most importantly, it would be a mitzvah if you pass this bill. And Joe Doria, who's from St. Peter's, grabbed me in the hallway as a young assemblyman. He goes, what's a mitzvah? But anyway. Exactly, and the rest is history. Thank you, Rabbi. It's not everybody that has a follow back like Rabbi Cooper. So I'm going to speak to my charge at hand. I wanted to say thank you to David, and most importantly, to the Alliance and to the sponsors. I think we've all historically been at similar events during the course of our lives. But this event is particularly special because of my dear friend Michael and Rabbi Cooper. And as David said when he referenced the rabbi, this doesn't happen every day in New Jersey or every day in our lives. The Rebbe is Associate Dean and Director of Global Social Action at the Wiesenthal Center. He's been a longtime activist, human rights causes on 5 continents. He came to help Rabbi here found the Simon Wiesenthal Center. They regularly meet with world leaders, religious leaders, Pope Francis, presidents, foreign ministers. He's an acknowledged expert on online hate and terrorism. And he's helped to produce and present the Center's renowned traveling exhibitions at the United Nations, the Knesset, the Congress, the Vatican, Tokyo, New Delhi, Buenos Aires. And he's the founder of the Global Forum on Antisemitism. And Newsweek ranked Rabbi Cooper and Ayer as number 8 among the 50 most influential rabbis in the United States. Rabbi has also worked extensively with Arab leaders in the Gulf states and witnessed the historic UAE, Bahrain, Israel Abrahamic Accord ceremony at the White House. In 2002, he was appointed Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, which tracks violations of religious freedom around the world. And he's also co-authored with Reverend Johnny Moore, The Next Jihad, based on their interviews in Nigeria with scores of Christian survivors of the deadly Islamic terroristic attacks. His op-eds have appeared in major United States, Israeli outlets, in Asia, in the Arab News, in Al Arabiya, and also he's a recipient of Yeshiva University's Revel Community Service Leadership Memorial Award, a recipient of an honorary doctorate from Yeshiva University, and the the Orthodox Union's National Leadership Award. My friends, on behalf of the Rand family, on behalf of all our sponsors, it's a great honor to call to this stage Rabbi Abraham Cooper.
So I used to have a line at this point where I would thank the person, in this case the governor no less, for this amazing introduction, something that would have brought real pleasure to my mom. And then I would say, I know that's a fact because she's the one who wrote it. So my mom is now looking down from heaven, having passed away a few weeks ago, but I think the line is still true. I wanted to thank Daryl and her family, but Daryl Rand is a true leader, and as a person who has 3 daughters, eventually you'll learn that there's some people you just don't argue with. If she says, I think you should do this, just cut to the chase and agree. Only good will come from it anyway. And I also wanted to recognize someone I just met, but I think she's got to be one of the strongest people in the room. If you're both a politician and a pastor, so Joyce Waterman, wow, a real honor to meet you. Just absolutely incredible. And I'm very much aware, mostly through Daryl. I do follow basketball. I didn't realize, though, that this great university has always had its arms open wide for members of the Jewish community, including from many Jews who lived in New York, who came to study here because back then, being a white Jew didn't mean privilege. It just meant you were a Jew. And unfortunately, back in the day, in those days, everything was a struggle for minorities of white and any other color. I'm not sure that much has changed over the years. But I would like to just share with you 2 stories. 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 2 sto that in their way don't have anything to do about fighting anti-Semitism, but in a way they do. There is no question that Pope John Paul II will go down in history, certainly in the opinion of most of the people in our community, as the greatest pope who ever lived. He certainly built on previous pontiffs, like Pope John the 23rd, but he was truly an amazing person, having himself experienced the Nazi oppression in Poland. I called up the Vatican and I spoke to the Jewish liaison and said, Rabbi Heyer and I would like to come see the Pope. And the man was incredulous. He said, what do you mean? You know, he's critically ill. And besides, I'm looking at the list. You already met the Pope. They keep a list of the Vatican. So what do you want to see the Pope for? He's recognized Israel. He prayed in Auschwitz. He was at the Western Wall. What could you possibly want to do with the Pope? I said, honestly, all we wanted to do is come and say thank you. So he said, well, let me check. He called back the next day and he said, so here's the deal. We're going to give you an appointment. It was the Monday before Thanksgiving. And then 3 days later, he called back and said the Pope's health doesn't allow it. And he put it on hold. 3 weeks later, we got a call. I remember it was on a Wednesday, and this gentleman who's well-versed in the quirks of halacha, Orthodox Judaism, said, so here's the deal. His Holiness is rallied, and he's prepared to meet with you in his private chapel. Monday at 11 a.m. you will have the first appointment. However, we know you guys, so you need to understand you could be flying to Rome on Thursday night, because we had to be there before the Sabbath, and if things don't go well, you will have traveled to Rome and you won't see the Pope. If you're ready to take that shot, we'll give you 6 people maximum in the room. You can have the meeting. So at 10:30, they usher us into the chapel, and there Pope John Paul II is pre-positioned with a special chair and a special seat, because the way it works in the Vatican, and I understand that Catholics have a lot of trouble getting in, but somehow Jews, not so much. The way it works in a private meeting is the main representative speaks for 3 minutes, and then the Pope responds for 3 minutes, and then you have a conversation. So we come into the room, we look at the Pope, and for those of you who remember him, he was well over 6 feet tall, he was a skier, he was robust before he got shot. In case you didn't remember that he was almost assassinated by a Turkish terrorist. So there he is. His head is he can no longer hold his head straight. He was drooling. And we sat there. It was an amazing moment, but I don't know about anyone else. I kept asking myself, is he really here? So Rabbi Heyer, my boss and friend and mentor for 47 years, he has an amazing array of talents. 2 Oscars, a Talmudic scholar, building museums, building the Wiesenthal Center from an idea. One of his few weaknesses, besides being a Yankee fan, is he butchers names and places. He just, you can transliterate, it doesn't work. So in his second paragraph before His Holiness, and he said, and we recall with fondness, Your Holiness, that when you were a teenager, you were the goalie on the soccer team of your native town of, and then he just destroyed the name. At which point, Pope John Paul II burst out laughing. And that's when we knew that we were having a meeting with the Pope. And I will say that for the next 45 minutes, and he read his statement, and we had the Q&A. We were there to ask for him to take up the issue of suicide bombing with religious leaders, and he was meeting with Muslim leaders the next day. But for me, what I remember most was being in the presence of a man who for 45 minutes you saw the spirit defeat the physical. An amazing, amazing human being. And then if you think that, if you think that having relationships don't really make things different. So I've had the opportunity to be with Pope Francis like 3 times, but the third time was really interesting because it was in Bahrain, one of the peace partners of the state of Israel. And there was an interfaith conference which I attended. And then on Thursday night, I got a call from the Bahrain National Broadcasting Company saying, Rabbi, would you mind very much, the Pope's plane is coming in 2 hours. Not too many people know His Holiness yet. He was going to spend 3 days. So would you mind doing the color commentary on national Bahrain television for Pope Francis' visit? And so I was there also with my friend Johnny Moore. So you had an Orthodox rabbi from LA, you had an evangelical pastor from Virginia, and we were giving the Rashi and Tosfos, or we say the color commentary, on His Holiness's visit. And he had canceled most of his trips. He's not feeling that great, but the next day was so utterly amazing to watch 3 people sitting next to each other. There were about 1,000 invited guests. And you had King Hamad of Bahrain, who wrote this amazing, you can look it up online, it's the Kingdom of Bahrain's Declaration on Religious Tolerance. An amazing document. So you have an Arab king and head of state, the Pope, and the head of Al-Azhar University. That means that that gentleman represents over 60 million Muslims. And to watch these 3 people interact, so what did the Pope speak about? He actually invoked King Hamad's speech on religious tolerance. I think that's as good a place as any to start with the most important takeaway, I think, from this amazing gathering, is that people do make a difference. The interaction, when we met King Hamad at the palace in 2017, that's another area, I'm from Brooklyn originally, Rabbi Hires from the Lower East Side. Whenever we're in a pre-royalty meeting room and someone comes over and says, well, you could be meeting the Queen of Spain, so you know you're supposed to, put your hand out first, you don't do this, you don't do that. As they say in Chinese, Grunish Helfen. We come in, the entire brain trust of this country in the room, there's the king. Rabbi Hire goes right up to him and puts his hand out to the king. Basically not done. The king puts his hand out to Rabbi Hire. Rabbi Hire then takes his second hand and puts it over the hand of the king, and then recites in Hebrew the blessing that we have when you're in the presence of royalty, and then translates it into English. A little later on, my buddy Samir, who we call the Shadow, his grandfather was the aide-de-camp to the king. His father, who passed away at the age of 96, with the father of the current king, and Samir's been together with His Majesty since they were teenagers. And his main job, would you like it, is to tell the king when he's wrong. And if he doesn't tell the king when he's wrong, that's when he first gets in trouble. So he asked him in a private moment, what's with you and Rabbi Heyer? You've met rabbis before, you've met Jewish leaders before, you have Jews who live in your kingdom. You know, you guys, like, you really hit it off. What was it about Rabbi Heyer? He said, I'll tell you. When he put his hand out and gave me that blessing, he was the first person in my entire monarchy who put his hand out, not to ask for something, but to give me something, to give me a blessing. And for that, I'll always, look at it and cherish that particular moment. So I'm not here to tell people don't follow protocol. What I am here to say, especially we have business people, I think every successful business person in this room, if you followed protocol or advice from everyone about what was impossible, you'd never be where you are today. And I think that's one of the main reasons, other than Darrell asked me, why I wanted to come before a group like this, because business people don't have to be primed to break down stereotypes and to break down false barriers. They have to do that if they're going to be successful in business. And in fact, that's really true in the Middle East. It's even true between Israelis and Palestinians, but politicians have a tendency to get in the way. We have the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles. That opened 30 years ago, and we've had, I think, 7.6 million visitors, including kings and heads of state and presidents, future presidents, Dalai Lama, etc. Well, what we learned and continue to learn from the people who visit the museum is that people can change, but you can only change one person at a time. If someone comes to you with some sort of magic formula that's going to resolve every one of our problems with a snap of a finger or repeating some slogan, it will have no lasting impact. So we can confirm to you that people can change, and the people who are faith leaders in this room, they put their lives on the line based on that firm belief. So I think, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about our namesake, Simon Wiesenthal, in the course of the Q&A. We can talk about what's going on at CUNY, City University of New York, where I spent this morning. I had 2 meetings, one which I can talk about. And the overall challenge of, how do we go forward with integrity, with maintaining our own identities, and continuing to build out and on the American dream. I am the Vice Chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. There are 9 commissioners appointed by the President and the Democratic and Republican leadership of Congress. It's a great honor to serve, and I already know from my own experience, because I ask myself the same question every day. Every single year from the early 1990s, when the FBI first started to compile statistics, every single year, COVID, no COVID, the number 1 target of hate crimes in America based on race are blacks, and the number 1 target, 2.4% of the population, 63% of the hate crimes based on religion, are Jews. Now, I don't usually like to talk for another group, but I'm pretty sure there are no African Americans and there are no Jews who want to maintain the number 1 position for another year. But it is a signal for the younger generation coming up, with all of our differences and social media disasters and all the rest, that at the end of the day, there are common enemies that are out there. And what's so great about the American experience and experiment is that you can actually do something about it. And that's really, I think, the only legitimacy for us to try to hold other societies accountable, whether the targeting of Catholics in Nicaragua, the targeting of Christians to a certain extent, and Muslims in India, the targeting of Hindus in Bangladesh, the targeting of Muslims and Christians in China. We can go on and on and on. But one thing Americans do know from the history of our nation, so much of the early part was written right here in the state, in this area, is that the core value upon which the American dream, the American civilization, the fledgling country was based on religious freedom. So the lens that we look through at human rights globally is religious freedom. And maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea if we took that advice and turned it inwardly, right here in our societies. So I think that's enough of a global introduction. I'm going to sit down here in, I think, very friendly territory. Put on a little mic, although Orthodox rabbis don't usually use them, but it's not the Sabbath, so it's not a problem. And we'll go from there.
Thank you, Rabbi. While the rabbi gets mic'd up, I too would like to thank Daryl and her family. You honor this extraordinary legacy today and have for decades. Also to recognize the First Lady of our city, my wife, Amy, who joins us, a former councilman from Englewood, Michael Cohen, the village rabbi. And what a schus, what a privilege to sit with a living legend, Rabbi. I too have a bit of a story. My wife and I got here a little earlier. This seems to have some hallowed ground. We went to a local proprietorship to see where that kosher market was, and we were told that it was closed. Imagine you get a phone call from the governor, you get a phone call, and you read the newspapers, and a few hours after a major shooting in Jersey City, you have a visit of the widow of one of the attendees of this event that calls in you. She thought my law firm was at City Hall. I was marrying a couple early in the morning, and they came to see me. And I want to first also thank the governor, Governor McGreevey. Without you bringing that law forward, so many children, police officers in Englewood come to me, I'd like my children to go see Auschwitz. Can we raise some money so that they can go there now that they learned it in the public high school? Without that effort, so many people would not hear the terrible tragedy and the stories. We are indebted to you as a country and as a people for that love. So my wife and I reminisced, and it was a real extraordinary experience to meet with this woman who came to City Hall. I said, what happened yesterday? She says, well, the black Israelites came in with guns. They wanted to kill Jews. And where was your husband? Standing behind the counter. What did he do? Well, he opened the door so that another chassid could get out because he had been shot. And was he okay? Yes, he saved his life. And then what did your husband do? He closed the door and he stayed. Why did he close the door? Why did he stay? He closed the door and stayed because there were 50 young children behind that door learning. And he knew if he moved, that those 50 kids would be in jeopardy. And he got killed. So how can I help you? Well, my daughter and I have no green card, no visas. We don't know what to do. And I accepted to do the case, and I said, yesterday your husband died as a Jew. Today I will do the Christian thing, and our office is honored to help you, and we're working on a U visa. The rabbi and I were talking. It takes 7 years for her now to get a green card after this act. If it took her husband 7 seconds to make a decision to end his life protecting 50 others, we must do better than what was done for her. We all need, as you artfully coined, Rabbi, to separate the spirit, because that lives beyond the physical. But the physical that we see and that we're hearing, Rabbi, this online hate and vitriol is at an all-time high. The culture of social media has created a vessel that has brought these numbers, both for the black and for the Jewish community, to an all-time high. Do you have any thoughts on the curtailment of this. I know we're not here to curtail First Amendment privilege and communication, but should social media remain unbridled?
Well, thank you. Why not? Yeah, that's a key question. I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I don't know how many of you have read President Biden's 60-page report on the national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And I think there are some significant flaws. But one of the most important things in there that is important is a direct shot at the social media giants. Basically, what we're all dealing with right now, because we're all recipients of the tremendous value of social media, well, the price for that free lunch is, of course, our privacy, our personal data, et cetera, et cetera. And what the internet companies have managed to do is to basically, I'm looking at the audience, how many of you even ever heard of Ma Bell? Yeah, okay, some are being kind. So they're hiding behind what was the old Ma Bell rule, meaning that there were early attempts when we used to use these like rotary phones, and before, shortly after electricity was invented. And what happened was that Ma Bell, which ran the phone system, they said, look, the service that we give to the public is just to help communicate a thought, an idea, a word from one point to another. You can't hold us legally accountable or culpable for what's said in those conversations, because we have no idea what is being said or who it is who is saying it. So that's the basic rule that's been in there. Somehow, the internet companies have found a way to put themselves into the same category, meaning you can't really sue them for anything. They just went again to the Supreme Court on behalf of victims of terror, and the Supreme Court, I think correctly said, you have to take that back to Congress. We're not a legislative body. It's unfortunate, but I think logically was correct. So the bottom line is, in this report, it actually says, look, if you don't start doing your job of degrading the capabilities of the bigots, the racists, the anti-Semites, I'm now paraphrasing my language, the terrorists, then maybe it's time to remove that protection from all of the companies. That for them would be nuclear, because it would impact on the business model, and right now still have Washington pretty much in a lockdown. But the fact that a national strategy put together by the White House would have a separate section just on the issue of social media is proof that, I think, what was it, Michael, 5, 6 years ago, when we were sitting before COVID with the top 3 people of the NYPD, average age closer to mine than the younger people there, and I asked them, like, what's changed in New York over the last 3 or 4 years, because the attacks against religious Jews and institutions were already rising before COVID. And the 3 of them said almost simultaneously, social media. Social media allows someone or a group of people to create a subculture of hate. They can target people for that hate. They can use the same technology to recruit people for their cause. And as long as we're talking about social media also, we release a report in the beginning of March every year. And this year, one of our main findings was, if you have TikTok in your home, get rid of it, and get rid of it now. Forget China. That's a good debating point. I'm talking as a parent and a grandparent. The way in which TikTok is structured, your kid, your daughter, your grandson, can go on TikTok, let's say, may hear a song or a poem that a surviving kid whose school was shot up wrote and sang in honor of his classmates who died. It's a beautiful thing. But there's a way, if you push the wrong button, you're going to go to that song on Telegram, which is the worst of the worst, based over there primarily in Russia. And what's happening is that a lot of the bad actors take some of the good information and use that to bait and switch. I bet you don't know that there are private groups on social media that promote school shootings. They celebrate each shooting. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on the internet. A key component of trying to degrade their marketing capabilities, not a speech issue. We're all on social media for marketing reasons. And you don't have to worry, there's any idea that's out there is going to find its way online in any event. But for the main companies to allow themselves, excuse me, to be leveraged by these bad actors and evildoers is unconscionable and has to change. You know, it can start with the community, it can start with an elected official, but at the end of the day, it's Silicon Valley that has to change.
Thank you. As a community and as a people, we realize the importance of connecting our past to the present. Is the Simon Wiesenthal Center an institution or an organization that you feel has kept up with the time? What is the special sauce and the mantra that you are involved in when it comes to those connective fibers, so that you not only take the lessons of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism as the tropes are known, but you make it current and vibrant?
Well, I mean, that is a critical question. And I guess, just going to hold it up, maybe that
You know, you look like a spy. Just take it off and hold it.
There we go. It's not anybody's fault. As I said, I happen to be an Orthodox rabbi, so I'm not used to mics. I think one of the most forward-thinking people I ever met in my life, who influenced me so dramatically, was none other than Simon Wiesenthal. Simon Wiesenthal was an architect by profession. He married his childhood sweetheart between the wars. He was a victim of anti-Semitism, as almost every European Jew was during those difficult, very difficult years and tragic years. And by the end of World War II, 89 members of his family, along with his wife's family, were dead for the crime of being Jews. He barely survived the 5 camps that he was in. He was liberated at Mauthausen by the U.S. Army, and he was too weak to stand to hug and thank the U.S. soldiers. But from the beginning, and if you come to a Museum of Tolerance, you'll see a document, amazing, marked May, the end of May 1945. That's like 3 weeks after his liberation. He already had a typed report with some of the leading Nazis. It sort of was what kept him, what really kept him going. And Mr. Wiesenthal was one of the most forward-looking people, and here's the way I would frame it. Some of the survivors that he knew, and later on became good friends with, who had gone and become partisans in the forests of Eastern Europe, came to Simon Wiesenthal in the months after the war and gave him a list of 10 Nazi war criminals. When you added up how many Jews they were responsible for murdering, it would be in the 7 figures. And they said to him, Simon, we don't need you to do anything. We're not asking you to join our group. Just give us the locations of where these people, these 10 murderers, mass murderers are. Just give us the information. Now understand, this is not a discussion that took place at a university conclave in 1960 or 2000. It was a few months after the liberation of Auschwitz and Mauthausen. And Mr. Wiesenthal said, "I'm not going to cooperate with you." They said, "What do you mean you're not going to cooperate? They murdered all of our families, yours too." No, the killing of Jews in Europe is not news. What transpired on us is also bigger than us. And what we need are convicted criminals in a court of law and not new martyrs for future Nazis. Incredible statement. He became friends with most of these people who emigrated eventually to Israel. And at the first time they met, those of you who know Israel, Kibbutz Lochamei HaGetaot, the kibbutz of the ghetto fighters, north of Haifa, the original group was still there. And when Wiesenthal came to visit them, most of them said, "Simon, upon reflection, you were right." And one of them said, "I remember what you told us. What will happen when you go out to do your vigilante work? How many Nazis will you be able to kill? 6, 60, 600, maybe 6,000? Eventually the Allies are going to stop you and they'll throw you in jail." So what will history write? From 1939 to 45, the Nazis killed 6 million Jews. And from 1945 to 1947, the Jews killed 60, 600, 6,000 Nazis. No, what's been destroyed, Wiesenthal emphasized, almost totally, is the very notion of justice. Every day, every victim has their day in court, every crime. People are responsible for the mass murder of hundreds of thousands of individuals. He says, my job, the way I look at it, he said then, for the next few years, is to try to resurrect the very basic concepts of justice that the Nazis almost succeeded in erasing from the world forever. Now, to have access to a person with that kind of moral GPS, who unfortunately, whose families and he suffered, unspeakable atrocities, when Simon Wiesenthal spoke, we listened. And so the question of, how do you bridge the gap from the past? We're now in 80 years later, young people, increasingly right here in this city, were born after 9/11. They have to speak to older folks. Remember you looked across the river and you saw, and talk about Vietnam, that's ancient history. And World War II, it might as well be World War I for the average young person. So there's a huge mountain to climb, but it's a worthwhile one. Let me give one example for those of you who come visit the Museum of Tolerance in LA. Our latest exhibition, it's a small one. It's about the Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference took place in January 1942. There were 15 state ministers of Germany, and they were gathering for one reason, and that was to discuss and then vote on the cheapest way to mass murder an entire people. The man who was in charge of this, a man by the name of Heydrich, who shortly thereafter would be assassinated by Czech resistance fighters, he pulled over Adolf Eichmann, who was the architect of the final solution, and said, I'm worried about this meeting because of the 15 ministers who are here, 8 of them have PhDs, and we need a consensus. What happens if they oppose the plan? Over drinks in 90 minutes, at a 15-0 vote, they decided to try to kill every one of the 11 million Jews who were alive at that time in Europe. They succeeded in mass murdering 6 million European Jews. But every one of those academic high achievers had no problem voting enthusiastically for that outcome. And so here's one good lesson to teach, and we have some great academic leaders in the audience here. But we should never confuse intellectual and academic excellence with ethics. Unless you teach ethics by example to your family and to your friends and to your neighbors, don't expect that they're going to pick that up for extra credit in elementary school, middle school, high school, junior college, or university. Of course.
I should say anecdotally, my father represented von Ribbentrop's son. He represented Deutsche Bank years ago. And von Ribbentrop was Hitler's Secretary of State, and the son came into our office to get a green card and would click his heels and made everybody uncomfortable. And the lawyer on the case refused to go down and get a green card. And my father went down then to get the green card with him and told the lawyer in no uncertain terms the same lesson that you're leading us toward, which is we don't hurt the sins of a father to a child. And they'll remember that it was a Jew that got him his green card. The thing that they didn't expect was it was a World War II veteran who was the examiner. And there are questions on the form whether or not you were part of the Nazi Party. And of course, he had a prominent role in being a son and everything. But the fact that Simon Wiesenthal would have that grace under fire, and that he used that microphone made what he did not just relevant and ethical, but important for this generation going forward too.
Well, I would also, just for the historic record, remind everyone that the Deutsche Bank was called the economic equivalent of the Wehrmacht by the United States occupying military authorities. So that's the whole issue of Nazi assets, of stolen jewelry, of art. That's a whole nother aspect. But I think, I chose that particular example because I think we have to try to do our best to be relevant to the younger generations, to say, well, what was unique about the Shoah? Why should we spend any time on it? There's so much horrible stuff going on today. Why don't we just cut to the chase? Well, for one thing, today everyone's going around and saying, words may be free, but words have consequence. And when someone threatens you with genocide, take that person seriously. Those who are acquired lessons through the innocent blood of millions of Jews and other victims of the Nazis, and some of the greatest young Americans who fought in Europe and never came home in order to defeat that monstrous, racist ideology. One of the things that Simon Wiesenthal warned us about from the beginning was, he said that anti-Semitism and hate did not die with Hitler in the bunker. He told that to us in 1977. Let me tell you one other thing that he said, because I'm not really a very smart guy, but occasionally I do listen, and when he spoke. So this was in 1980, officially old. And Mr. Wiesenthal was speaking in the Midwest at various universities, and I had the honor of accompanying him. In Toledo, Ohio, a student got up and asked him the following question. So, Mr. Wiesenthal, could it happen again? It's 1980. And here was his answer. He said, well, if a society has a crisis and you have organized hate and you have technology, anything is possible. Now, 1980, nobody ever thought, had any clue there would someday be something called the internet or iPhones. When Mr. Wiesenthal was talking about technology, he was referring to the technology of the 1930s and 40s, radio, newsreels, and then he went on to say that if in 1492 Spain had access to the technology that the Nazis had, no Jew would have survived in Spain, no Catholic would have survived in England, and no Protestant would have survived in France. So if we're talking about bridging the past, the present, and the future, I always hearken back to the words of Simon Wiesenthal, and maybe that's why, before I even had a computer, and by the way, I can't answer any technological questions. If you have them, you can give them to me. I'll email my grandchildren, and they can answer them for you. But we know a little bit about hate, and we weren't surprised that the David Dukes and the KKK, and they ran to this new thing called the internet because there was no filter, there was no referee, there's no guide, and if you had a really good-looking website and you believed in the Flat Earth Society, or you wanted to say horrible things about Martin Luther King Jr. and it was a more attractive website than the stuff that was available for a junior in high school doing their annual paper on this American great hero. They would have gotten an F from the teacher because that particular website were all attacks on MLK. So from the beginning, the internet was a magnet for the evildoers, and still is. And when COVID hit, I don't know about you, but for me, I have kids in Denver, I have kids in Jerusalem, grandchildren. You know, social media was our lifeline to stay in touch with our loved ones.
It seems, Rabbi, that social media during the pandemic, whether it was Teams or Zoom, Skype is a thing of the past, changed the culture of the conversations. My wife and I traveled to Athens this past December for an international conference on anti-Semitism. New York Mayor Eric Adams and about 7 or 8 other U.S. mayors were there. We had a chance to meet our compatriots, our burgermeisters in Germany and other places, and to commiserate. And they asked me to speak on bringing bonds together between the different communities. They had known that I was the mayor, also keeping Shabbos, that would walk 5-6 miles to a church or to an event, even if I didn't know the person, in the rain and the snow and with a police car at a nice distance to make sure that I got there in one piece. Why is anti-Semitism on a rapid rise, or is this just a normal experience? Is it really attributed to the culture of the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter, the seeking of justice or equity, if you would?
Yeah, well, that's obviously a critically important question about, you know, why now and why is it raging so? So Simon Wiesenthal told us that where democracy is strong, it's good for Jews, and where it's weak, it's bad for Jews. And you can probably put in for any other group also. Obviously, what the pandemic did, for example, the embrace of many of the conspiratorial ideas, some of them complete lunacy, some of them were the kinds of questions nobody was ready to answer. We have a broken political culture in America today. Everyone's talking past each other. Everyone gets demonized. COVID was a disaster, not only because of all of our loved ones who died, suffered, etc., but also because there was really nobody there to give answers. The ground would shift every couple of weeks, and people would finally be saying, well, you just told me X, now you're saying Y. As soon as COVID hit, within about 2 weeks, there was an explosion of conspiratorial theories that are usually just hoisted onto Jews. But this time, they took out that word and put in Asians, put in Chinese, and you found that there were, unfortunately, here in the United States, violent attacks, including murderous attacks, on innocent people. I always thought, can you imagine? I love going to Asia. I can't go anymore to China because of my current work with the U.S. government. But my second favorite city after Jerusalem is Hong Kong. Hong Kong was basically made up of people who swam across and fled communist China. They had nothing. They worked from ground zero so their kids would do better. Many of them came to North America and elsewhere, fabulously successful. Others went into the medical field, health. You imagine a doctor whose grandparents swam across in order to get to Hong Kong to freedom, whose extended family perished at Mao's Cultural Revolution, now being blamed for COVID? But that's a kind of grotesque big lie that the Jewish people have had to pay for the millennia. So social media was, let's put it this way, the bigots, the racists, the shysters were well pre-positioned on social media, waiting for their chance to make a breakthrough into the mainstream. And unfortunately, in many cases, they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, including, unfortunately, Kanye West, whose rant against the Jewish people reached a minimum of 20 million households, for starters. So the numbers are astounding, they're troubling, and they're very challenging. But I would just, again, emphasize in terms of our work, and you alluded to it. I mentioned to the city council president that I travel a great deal, and I know one thing, my involvement in interaction in cities like Chicago and elsewhere, all of the heavy lifting in our communities are done by the faith leaders, by the pastors, by the rabbis. And those are exactly the people who you'll never see on the evening news. They never get honored at a banquet outside of their own, but they're the pillars of American life. And by virtue of how they live their lives, they're the truth tellers that can defeat and overwhelm the tsunami of hate and conspiratorial theories that are poisoning many of the minds of many people, especially young people around the world. And let's remember from 9/11, you don't need a mass movement in order to change history. So we're at a very tough point in our collective history, and yet we can, I think, continue to take an important lesson from our border, whether you want it open or closed. People around the world still want to come to the United States of America because it is the greatest country in the world with the greatest amount of personal freedom, unmatched in any democracy or any other system around the world. The bottom line of all of that means that if you can figure out how to create alliances and break down the stereotypes and build the friendships, you can pretty much defeat any problem that's thrown our way. That's not true elsewhere in the world.
That's very well said. We're fortunate to live in a state and to have a governor that encourages the New Jersey-Israel relationship by having a commission and fostering a business relationship. Rabbi, we have a very distinguished group of business leaders here. It seems, though, that the language has been also far too liberal in the business community. I see it in the political experience. Mr. Cohen, also a former councilman. Too many Orthodox on the council. Those developers, when they're talking about developers and people coming into the community and buying up properties and all of that. What's your advice if people were to be exposed to tropes and to epithets or to something like that? Has the formula changed now? We watch all these videos. As a professor, as a managing partner of a law firm, I have to sit and watch a video every year. Do you call it out on the spot? Is there a new protocol?
I don't think it's one size fits all, but we know one thing. The one option that's out there is silence. Silence is not an option. In confronting evil, it's not an option. Let me give an example from the Talmud, of all places. So the Talmud tells us an interesting story. It's not written down in the Bible. That says when Pharaoh was considering killing all of the firstborn Jewish babies, he called in 3 advisors. They were Bilam, who was the king of one of the nations in the area, hated the Israelites, worried about them, feared them. Jethro, who would go on later to be Moses' father-in-law, and Job, the ultimate example of a person, a great, nice person, a good person, who suffered seemingly for no reason. And the Talmud says you can learn a concept called midah keneged midah, measure for measure. What do you mean? He said, well, Bilam hated the Israelites, wanted to kill them, and if you read through the Bible long enough, you're going to find out that he died in a battle against the Israelites. So he tried to kill the Jews, he was killed. Jethro, when he heard, and Bilam had enthusiastically endorsed the genocide idea. Jethro, when he heard the idea of the genocide, he fled the room and left Egypt. He ran away. He found it to be so monstrous, he didn't want to be associated in any way. They ran after him. Obviously, they failed. What was he rewarded with? Well, later on, he had great-great-grandchildren who were Israelites. And that family had a place of honor right adjacent to the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. What about Job? So Job remained silent. He didn't give his opinion. He just sat there, didn't endorse it, right? The Talmud says that's why Job suffered the rest of his life. And you have to think about it. I mean, what kind of... Bilam was a soldier king. He died with his boots on, trying to win the day. That wasn't exactly a terrible way to end a life. If you're a soldier, you go to battle, you know there's a chance you're going to die. Are we saying, are we supposed to learn that maybe silence is worse than what he did? It's an open question, but it's certainly worthwhile for us. And I think the lesson starts very young. When you see bullying, and I was a fat little kid in Flatbush, I got bullied 5 days a week, but I knew when I got home, my parents would protect me and have the weekend off before going back. Today, bullying is 24/7. Kids don't even tell their parents what's going on. So I think the answer is, yes, we have to confront it, but I'm going to tell you something else. And that is that there isn't any individual, there's no business, there's no community that gets everything right. And that means that if you think you've been wronged, you have the opportunity and responsibility of responding to the attacks on you. That means, though, you have to get involved in a business council, you have to maybe join the local school board, you maybe have to run for mayor when it's the last thing in the world you want to do, or go on to a city council. Because if you want to be able to protect your own and raise the boat for everyone, the whole idea in the 21st century is you'll write someone else a check and they'll take care of everything. Yes, you have to write the checks anyway, but it doesn't work. There are no shortcuts to freedom. And the Jewish community, and it doesn't make a difference what kind of Jew you are. As we see, the force behind tonight's event, a guy with payas. In my day, when I was growing up in Flatbush, forget about payas. Somebody wearing a yarmulke going on Channel 4 was unheard of. So we're living in a changing world, and the answer has to be anything but silence. But that also means that when someone in the community doesn't do the right thing, when they do misbehave, when they hurt over the overall community, they cannot hide behind the anti-Semitism, shield or the anti-black shield or anything else. So one last word about values. We opened our Museum of Tolerance in LA 30 years ago, this past February. And I remember we hosted a group of gang members who came to see a new film called Schindler's List. We did 2 nights with them. And the young gentleman gets up and told me he had already been in jail from the age of 14 because of his involvement in a murder. But he was out, he's 26 now, he's looking forward in his life. He said, Rabbi, I get exactly what you're trying to do here at the Museum of Tolerance. Very laudable. I said, really, what is it that we're, yeah. You're trying to get us to take personal responsibility for our acts and to apply critical thinking to every situation. When you're right, you're right. I've never been able to improve on his analysis. A brilliant kid whose life was almost completely thrown away. I think also for our community, historically, that's always been the bottom line. And I think in terms of what makes America, the United States, the greatest social experiment ever, is the foundation of religious freedom, of personal freedom, and of the rule of law, equal under the law. That continues to be a struggle. Once you go away from that, and there are other ways to look at the world, watch out, because then you can wake up one morning and you've lost your country.
What a beautiful thought. The notion of shtika kavodah, as the Gemara says. The silence is as deafening. I often imagine that our founding parents, certainly our founding documents, would be upset in the deafening silence that comes out in Washington when it comes to immigration and other formidable experiences that really culled out our history, our diversity, and our legacy. I think our mettle is being tested, whether you're a leader in a municipality, in a business, in the rabbinate, or a faith. And I think it's clear that we need to travel on a two-way street. We need to be able to go out of our comfort zone. When Reverend Sharpton called me to participate in his National Action Network in a conversation with mayors, I was the only white Jewish mayor and 5, 6 mayors, and I was put off so close to Shabbos, I asked, can I speak now or debate now, rather than later. They respected that, and I developed a relationship. Urban mayors' conferences and other experiences show that we need to be familiar with the liturgy of other faiths and communities. Speak to how the Jewish community, particularly the business community, can enhance and diminish the results of anti-Semitism.
Right, so I would say 2 things. Number one, we need to work with our fellow citizens, whether it's in LA or here or anywhere, which means there are poor people to be fed and clothed. There are cleanup campaigns. There are a lot of basic things that will float the boat for everyone, and that should be a shared responsibility. Again, I think the most important way to get rid of a stereotype is when people meet each other, but meet each other where they have to work together in order to achieve a goal. And that means business people can step up. They have, it's the American way, and work together to make those kinds of activities possible. Shared experiences, maybe taking a group of teens down to Atlanta. What better place to learn about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.? He's an American martyr than taking maybe a bus trip of some kids from private and public schools. Obviously, later on, the possibility of maybe going together to some of the camps in Europe, taking a peace trip to the Middle East, maybe Morocco and Israel, 2 great places to be. Having business people with that kind of vision, bipartisan, multi-faith. I don't really believe so much in interfaith. I believe in multi-faith, because I respect people of other faiths. I'm not out to change anyone's path in terms of their religion. Business people can play a very pivotal role in that direction. The other piece of it is, I think it's important for the big businesses, and especially those in social media, to get out of politics and get back to what we've been lobbying them for 3 decades on. We all can make our minds up about who to vote for. There's enough foot in mouth disease from Democrats and Republicans that we have a pretty good idea by the time it's time for election day. We don't need Twitter, Facebook, or any of them to do our thinking for us. What we do need them to do is to make a set of rules about where they consider to be the red line in terms of hate speech and other similar activity, put some human capital into that, and live up to those standards. If they will help us diminish and degrade the hate in our society, that would be the biggest mitzvah that social media can do. And people who are stockholders, who are business people, who are involved in community and state and national gatherings, they have to speak up and speak out, even if it means standing out. But one thing about the United States of America, and it's something that we've always tried to live up to, is we're all in the same boat. You know the famous, Yiddish story where there's a guy who buys a ticket, he sits in the middle of the boat, takes out the hand crank, and starts boring a hole. And they tackle the guy and say, what are you doing? He says, what do you mean what I'm doing? Here's my ticket, I paid my $5 for the ferry, get off of me. You do whatever I want. There's only one problem. If you're successful, we're all gonna sing together. So, and I think the other critical aspect, and why I so much applaud Daryl's initiative and everybody involved with this evening, is that let's not wait until there's a crisis. The time for people to sit together and talk about how to improve life here in this community is when you don't have the mega crisis, when you don't have all the TV crews coming from across the water. Build out those alliances now, and it will pay amazing dividends in the long range. The worst time to find quote-unquote religion, if you will, collectively, is during those crises, because as soon as the crisis goes, so does the commitment. Now's the time to get involved.
Mayor Adams talked about his Breaking Bread and Building Bonds initiative, where he tenaciously would set up a series of community dinners with 10 or 12 people just to sit, eat, and talk and expose their experiences to one another. I met with a German mayor who spoke beautifully about looking to have menorah, Hanukkah lighting, and all kinds of Jewish events in Germany. There is a collective guilt in the next generation where they're trying to compensate for things. One of the final points that I think is important that municipal leaders, our police departments, superintendents of schools that we're learning is that you can't only rely on the police, that the massive amount of discrimination against the black community, the Asian community, anti-Semitism, is something that cannot be stemmed or stopped. We had in Englewood this last, we have a few bears walking around town as we speak, Rabbi, but I don't think that's in any way a biased event, but we had two children leaving with their father from a kosher restaurant. A young kid took a BB gun and shot at the one kid that had a yarmulke, pierced the skin. The man had the tenacity to run, got the license plate, and then was arrested by my detectives the next day. The Bergen County Prosecutor's Office studied it, and it was not a bias crime. And yet, all of the WhatsApp groups for the moms and all the different community were really outraged until they heard the facts. It took a while even within communities that are looking for justice to be meted out properly, social media creates a frenzy. But in the end, the prosecutor said this was a kid who had no history and made a mistake. What if it was one of the Orthodox Jewish kids who did this? Would that be an anti-Jewish event? It was just stupidity, but it wasn't anti-Semitic stupidity. I was so impressed with the way the prosecutor looked at this. Any engagement with what would be a gun or a gun would be a very severe crime that he could invocate if he wanted to, but he artfully decided not to. Speak to the police experience. Is it your experience that they are a protector, or it's an inadequate protection the way the numbers are flowing?
Well, let me first of all talk about Los Angeles. During COVID, speaking quite candidly, I don't think we were the only community, but we also had, some severe riots that hurt mostly small businesses. And there was no accountability. We were thrown under the bus by the political establishment in Los Angeles. Those were very horrifying days. We were deeply worried, and on top of that, with COVID. Our lifeline was with the Los Angeles Police Department, a depleted Los Angeles Police Department. But we felt that at the end of the day, they were the only thing standing between us and even more serious situation. Having said that, I wanted to share with you something else about, we haven't talked about artificial intelligence tonight, we're not going to go into it, but during those very difficult weeks, someone on social media said that they read somewhere that there was going to be an attack near our synagogue in our community, a heavily Jewish area. And people, myself included, were just super scared. It took 4 days with the help, I won't say exactly how we were able to do it. We found out that that quote-unquote warning emanated from someone in Germany, not someone in West Los Angeles or in downtown LA. So when we talk about social media as our main lifeline to information, etc., and facts, the further we get along with this, the manipulation of individuals, of people, especially of kids, but not only, the potential there only increases. And when you have that kind of, the kinds of ideas of not being able to give your neighbor the benefit of the doubt or even establish a relationship with them, who does that serve? It serves the enemies of the United States of America. So I just think we can't stop that train from moving forward, but the way we can defend ourselves has nothing to do with the internet or social media. It has to do with shutting the damn computer off, rolling up your sleeves, and working with your neighbor in order to improve the life for everybody in your community.
I'm going to end with a little anecdote or story. I'll never forget, I was flown to Europe with Pele, the soccer icon who passed away a few months ago. He was a dear friend and client. And after getting to know him, we went from Switzerland to London. He said, I have an important client for you. He has an immigration issue. Can I make an introduction? I said, of course. Introduced me. Then he said, are you available for dinner tomorrow night? I met him for dinner. And he says, I want to tell you a little story about your father. I didn't know that Pele had a relationship with my father. We had done a green card, I think, for one of his kids. He said, I was at Lincoln Square Synagogue on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, taking Berlitz classes in English, because my English was terrible. And I sat in a breakout room with John Lennon, who was taking Japanese classes to learn how to speak to Yoko's family. And John Lennon said...
How did that go?
So John Lennon said to Pele, what's this Shabbos thing? So Pele said, what do you mean? He says, well, I have this lawyer, my father, who won't take my calls Friday night till Saturday night. What's a Shabbos? So both of them said, why don't we ask the rabbi? And I heard this from Rabbi Riskin also. And they went to Rabbi Riskin, and he explained to them the whole experience. And the anecdote that I end with this story is that we, in many ways, have to just quietly continue to do what we do, to revel in our faith, to make sure that when people ask questions, they look at our faith and our observance of it in a noble way, as we try to be the perfect business people and professionals in our chosen places, and hopefully be on the mouths of people who respect the decisions and the time with family and with God that we choose.
If I can just end with carrying on your point. So I recently accompanied a group of young American Jewish business folks and their young, successful Israeli business people for a week in the United Arab Emirates. And so when I spoke to the group, I said, you know, chances are you're going to be asked by someone, you're in this and this business. Let's get together for lunch. Now understand that so far, close to 500,000 Israelis and Jews have visited the United Arab Emirates since they signed the peace treaty. Why? Because there's so much pent-up interest and curiosity about the other that was never available before. So I said to this mixed group, and I think most of them were not Shabbos Jews, you might be asked, let's get together for Saturday lunch, and we could discuss business. If I were you, and of course I'm not a businessman, so if they're smart, they didn't listen, say no, I'm not available on Saturday. Let's have brunch on Sunday morning. Because you think the curiosity is only one way. Jews want to know all about their Arab brothers, and they have no curiosity. They assume that if they're meeting someone from Israel, or a Jew from Toronto, or Buenos Aires, this is their chance to find out from the other sons of Abraham, what are your values? That is really in America, that brings people together, or separates them, but on more or less Judeo-Christian values. There's a lot there. So the idea would be, if you're not sure what your values are, even if you're a successful businesswoman or a successful businessman, take some time to become literate in what your values are, because anyway, you're going to be held culpable, good, bad, or otherwise, whether you're an African American, or a Jew, or a Latino, or an Asian, whatever it might be, the curiosity element is there. And unlike 50 years ago, if you don't explain what a synagogue is, someone's going to go up online and they're going to read Synagogue of Satan. So it's up to us. Are we going to tell our neighbors what goes on in the synagogue? Are we going to invite them in to take a look one Shabbat morning? Or are you going to leave it to the internet to teach them about Synagogue of Satan?
Thank you. Any questions from the audience before we close? Please.
I'm Nathan Herzog, son of Holocaust survivors, grandson of Holocaust survivors, and it's, as much as we hear it at home, Holocaust, both parents and grandparents survived it. Pretty amazing to listen to both of you, special Rabbi from Los Angeles. What we're hearing so much about is the big anti-Semitism culture is colleges. Colleges. I never went to college. I'm a college dropout. Still, I'm a successful businessman, I think, part of the family business. But I didn't hear anything tonight about it. Is there anything, talking to the crowd here, we're all concerned, obviously. We've all had some issues of anti-Semitism personally, or we've heard from neighbors. Is there anything we can do? Is there anything the Wiesel Center is doing about the unbelievable rise of anti-Semitism to young kids, and they get brainwashed by all this ridiculous anti-Semitism on college campuses?
Yeah. I think there's a lot that can be done. Some of it may not be very comfortable. But I don't know about you, and I went to a Jewish university, but every alumni, especially if you passed all your courses, you're going to be getting letters to contribute to your school until after 120, when you're beneath the ground, you'll be getting requests for money from your alma mater. Number one, what graduates of universities have to say to the people running the school carries a great deal of weight. Number two, there are Jewish people, University of Southern California is a perfect example, who gave mega millions of dollars to have a science building or some other facility named in their honor. Now, the University of Southern California, over the course of 2 years, Jewish students were purged from positions that they won by fair elections because they had the audacity of being pro-Israel. And whatever the pushback was, we were part of the pushback, it wasn't enough. And the perception was, and unfortunately the university was correct, that it would all blow over, especially since students are 4 years, 5 years, transitory. But the fundamental of purging people because of their faith and because of, in this case, we're also support for the state of Israel, or for people that is multiracial, the Jewish people, now being accused of having white privilege. I don't know, my bubbies and zadies came here to Ellis Island. I think between the four of them, they had maybe $25, and they built a future here. So I think pushback, protest, and also we have to do a better job preparing our children for life on campus, because young people also have to learn how to stand up for themselves. And that's, look, I graduated college in 1972. I spent some time in Israel, but you know, we had a little thing called the Vietnam War. We had the Martin Luther King assassination. We had the Cambodia protests on campuses that closed down every single American university. We had shootings at Kent State. It wasn't such an evolving time then either, but there was something about American life then that you don't see as much today. And that is that young people became involved in many movements for social justice. I'll just make one quick comment, because there was no internet then. But you know, Martin Luther King had tremendous impact on young Jews like me. There were like 4 channels on TV. How often would you hear him? But Martin Luther King was a preacher. He always quoted the Hebrew prophets. His speeches were all out of the social justice speeches of Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Micha, nonstop. So he may not have been targeting me in the audience, but his words were the words of our prophets. How many people do we have today in the public square who try to speak to all Americans with a message of hope and reconciliation? There weren't that many back then, but you saw a difference that one person could make. Again, the most important thing to do for our students, and it's not for one group or another to say, don't worry, I've got it handled. Hillel does not have it handled. They can't. There isn't one group that can. But remember the Talmud. Eob's answer is an answer that guarantees disaster. It's the worst possible answer. And when you push at universities, there are only the people, I'd say one last point, which is the one thing that the United States government, this report I hope would have adopted, was one definition of what anti-Semitism is. It's called the IHRA definition, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Why do you need a definition? You know how many university presidents have told me, oh, Rabbi, I see your point, but If only we had a legal definition of what anti-Semitism is, then we can hold people accountable, then we can train the campus police, then we can tell people where the red line is drawn. So there's a lot of work to be done, there's a lot of creativity here, and business people are always being asked by universities to do this, that, or the other thing. Is it a big surprise that when the Wiesenthal Center brought its exhibitions to India, that the first place we went was St. Stephen's College? Halfway around the world, or in Hong Kong, where you walked into a high school gym and you have a quote from the end of the book of Micha in English that they see every day when they eat lunch. What does God want from you? Other than to be a good person, walk humbly in his way. So Jews and Christians in our day, not in the time of our grandparents and great-grandparents, but here in America, we're natural allies. Members of minorities should be natural allies, but that doesn't happen automatically, and you can't rest on the laurels of events that took place 50, 60, and 70 years ago. We have real problems today. If we work together, only good will come from it.
I want to thank David again, Daryl, and your beautiful family, and you're a rock star, Rabbi. Thank you, and we know that we will face the challenges because we have leaders like you showing us the path. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. So,